distinct difference between them and the standard and admitted ones. So I'll go over it real quick. A standard and admitted carrier, let me give you the rundown of some of the easy ones that you would know, okay?
All right.
Progressive, Geico, State Farm, Allstate, Nationwide. I'm mentioning as many as I possibly
Liberty
can.
Mutual?
Liberty, Safeco, the Hartford, regional companies like Cooperative Insurance, Concord General Mutual, Ohio Mutual, Cincinnati. These are all companies that are going to be considered standard or admitted companies. These are the most common companies that you see. These are the companies that you see advertised or talked about the most. These are companies that in order to do business in a state, and I'm talking Vermont, but this would apply to all states because all the states have their own insurance laws and rules and regulations. As long as they adhere to the national requirements, the federal requirements are okay. But these standard carriers have to have all of their rates submitted to the state departments of insurance and approved. And if they're not approved, they kick them back and they have to get them and do them again. All of these standard admitted companies have all their policy forms and endorsements submitted to the state. The state reviews, approves or disapproves. Sometimes they kick them back and say, fix it, do a different thing. And I'm talking simple things like one company tried to get pet medical insurance on policies in a state, and the state said, no, we don't want that. Kick it out. Simple things like that. So there's some regulatory oversight directly upon these standard and admitted companies. But, and I see you want to say something.
I just want to ask a question. No, but go ahead.
So that's great. But these companies do have a tolerance level of risk. So you start getting into industries such as logging, industries such as heavy machinery, certain operations of mechanics or some car dealerships, not all, but there's certain types of risks. Vacant buildings. Maybe you bought a building and you're going to rehab it. Maybe you're going to flip it to sell it. I could go through thousands and thousands of things that are beyond the comfort level of these standard companies. And that's why these excess/surplus companies operate. They're not required to submit their forms and get them approved by the state. They're not required to have their rates approved by the state, but they have to comply with the state law, and it's as simple as that. But these companies serve a very important purpose for certain types of risk.
Okay, so as you led into that, and you explained it quite well there, as you led into that, the first thing that popped into my mind was high risk, and that seems to be the common denominator here.
Yeah.
I mean, like logging. Okay?
Yeah, certain exposures that companies just don't really have a market for. They don't want to cover it.
So you explained that every state has its own guidelines, laws, bylaws, however you want to term it, right?
Correct.
So the question is then, is there a national or federal standard as well?
There is. There's federal standards that every state has to adhere to, which has been uniform since the inception of insurance. So that is in place. But yeah, that's why you always will see what we call state amendatory endorsements on policies. And everyone's like, oh, I've seen that. And no, they haven't. Right? No, they're like, what are you talking about? But, so if I have a policy in Vermont, there's a Vermont amendatory that makes certain adjustments. And remember, these are contracts. So it's making adjustments to comply with state of Vermont requirements for insurance. You'll see the same in New Hampshire or other states as well. But back to the discussion of why you might need a surplus carrier. Number of reasons. There's even, I'm talking about risks that certain companies don't want to take on because they're afraid of the exposure, but there's also people who may be required by a lender to obtain flood insurance. And maybe they're in what we call a non-participating flood town. Lyndonville is a participating flood town. So is St. Johnsbury. So is Barnet. So is Waterford. So are some of the other towns. But maybe you're in Wheelock. Maybe you're in Sheffield. Maybe you're in another town that's a non-participating FEMA town. That means you cannot get flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program because that's the caveat. You have to be in a FEMA town to be eligible for that, and your town has to participate. If that doesn't happen, boom, now you're off to an excess or surplus company to get flood insurance. And we write those all the time. In fact, we're even starting to write some in the FEMA towns.
Wow. I think that with the time that we have left, I think this is a legit question here. And it will obviously have to be with the time we've got.
Legit's my son's favorite word right now, by the way.
Is it
Dad's
legit?
Day was legit a good day.
Too legit to
I keep
quit.
singing that every time.
Okay, so we mentioned that each state has different laws.
Yes.
Vermont and New Hampshire are considered reciprocating states, okay, like when it comes to laws and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. Now, if there are a lot of businesses, St. Johnsbury area, Linden area, do business in Littleton, and other towns in New Hampshire.
Sure.
Is there a requirement or is there the option for, say, a New Hampshire business that they have to have insurance in Vermont if they're doing business, and vice versa?
Vice versa. I like that. No. Here's how it works. For a business, we want to know the states in which you're operating in. In fact, I've got some companies that say, look, we'll cover you if you're operating in Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine and maybe even Massachusetts. But a lot of companies have some trepidation with people who operate in New York, just because there are such large sways and variances in the laws. Now, everything from a commercial policy that you just brought up as the request in the example, all the way to your auto insurance policy. Your auto insurance, the insurance will respond appropriately in the state in which the incident occurs. So if you are operating a New Hampshire business in Vermont and you have a Vermont loss, it's going to be handled to comply with Vermont law. Same with even something as simple as your auto insurance. You're at a store in Littleton and get into an accident and it's your fault, your insurance will respond appropriately to comply with state law. Again, so many variables. I mean, personal injury protection, PIP, that's a piece of auto insurance coverage available and required in many states, but not in ours and not New Hampshire. So, there are components that will make sure that you're complying amongst the different states in which you're in.
Okay, so the whole reason, listeners, that Mike decided to start this conversation
is
with
to
us,
confuse the heck out of you.
Well, no.
And I hope it worked.
No, well, what it does is it explains just how important it is to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, going to a website and clicking coverage, that's okay. You got insurance, but do you have the right insurance? The options and the basis being covered. So you explained an awful lot today. If I had a head on it, have to adjust it. Okay. Now, if folks want to have a conversation with you and the crew,
give us a call, 748-5224. We're at 229 Portland Street in St. Johnsbury, right off the bridge, like Jeff said earlier. You can find us on our website, thebarrettagency.com. Google, Facebook, and YouTube is all Barrett Insurance Agency. We're in our final week of collecting toys for the Santa Fund in St. Johnsbury. We are a drop-off location. We have our Christmas tree up. We have a nice little assortment of toys. We would always love more. So if you are someone who would like to drop off toys, our office is open. We certainly would encourage you to do so. We'll be doing a monetary donation along with our friends who are going to be our upstairs tenants, which I'll talk about in later episodes of this to contribute.
Okay. Also, too, we understand that St. J Fire Department not only looking for toys, but any financial donations from listeners is much appreciated. Mike, thank you very much. We'll do it again next Tuesday. Till then, stay safe, warm, and healthy.
All the same to you.
Music coming from Matt Kearney on Magic